Hello, future technicians of James Clements Theater. My name is Brandon Berryhill. I've been the sound crew chief for 3 years, and I've been doing sound at JCT for about forever. I was a student technical director for a semester, and I stage managed for a semester. And I'm here to just work with Merit and record this video on just about everything about sound. I didn't really do a good job of training the next person. I sort of train the next person, but I want to have everything documented. I want to have everything from the very basics of you can watch this video to learn how sound works, to very advanced of here's what you can watch several times and still gain new knowledge from it every time. I'm not sure how this video is going to be edited, but I am going to try to keep it moving from less simple to more advanced the whole time. But just watch it the whole way through, just to see what it is, because if I forget something small, I might have to go back and add it later, and you're not expected to get everything the first try. I mean, I learned up to the last day I was here, and I'm just trying to get this down so you guys have a chance to see it and learn all this stuff. So, that's really the introduction. We're going to move on to what is sound. What is theatrical sound? This video will focus on theatrical sound at James Clements High School. I mean, you can go and get, a 4-year degree in live sound. It's that complex. But we're going to keep it to just theater sound and very basically touch on the editing bit of sound, because we do some editing here, but it's mainly just the live sound reinforcement. So the goal of sound is twofold. The first is to reinforce the actors. This is generally to make them louder through various types of microphones that we'll get into later. And then to set a mood, to set a theme with music and cues and things like that. Most of the time when an audience walks into a theater, the grand drape is closed. And the first thing they experience is sound. The first thing they have is that first sound cue to say, here's what this is about. Here's our period. Here's what the theme is. You can get a lot through with that first song, as well as sound is usually the last thing they hear. When the grand closes at the end, there's some post-show music that kicks up as the house lights come up, and that really sets the final mood for a play. I'm not going to get too extensively into song selection and things like that. You just have to work as a designer to figure out what you want. But I know we recently did a play that we took to the Southeastern Theater Conference, and it was a very emotional piece, and we ended it with a very emotional song that had one line that basically summarized the play. The line was, "I don't want to set the world on fire," and audience members talked about that as they left. It really set the final note. So sound is very powerful, and it's something that has to be taken with grace. But sound is not just an art. Sound is also a science. And it's the science I'm going to try to convey right now. Because you can't really teach art. You just have to experience art. You have to make failures and see what works and what doesn't work. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys. But as for the science, the first thing we'll get into is the crew setup. The crew setup changes from what type of play we're doing. There are really three main groups of plays we do. The first type is the Trumbauer piece or similar, such as Lies About High School. These are plays where they're usually teched by a 2-man sound crew. So you won't have all of the positions I'm about to name. 2 people will be able to do all of these positions. Then we have the bigger spring play every other year, and this is usually teched by a full crew, usually about 5 people. And then we have the musical. The musical is the biggest beast we cover, and later on when I get into various design elements, I'm going to spend a lot of time on the musical because it is the hardest thing we do. And if you can do the hardest thing we can do, you can easily tackle the easiest thing we do. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on musicals. So the positions of the crew, the biggest one and the most common one that every single crew has is the crew chief. This is the person in charge. This is the person who is telling people what to do, who is making the decisions, and they're the face of the crew. They're the person who goes to the technical director, to the director, They're the person who says what they need. The biggest one with the crew chief is purchasing, getting new items, getting new cables, communicating what we need, and time management. Putting on a play is a massive production, and sound needs a lot of time. We'll get into later how to run a mic check and the mic check, but sometimes a mic check can take, you need about an hour for it, and if you don't go and fight to get that, you won't have it, and the play will turn out not as good as if you had a longer mic check, and that falls on the crew chief. They spearhead the sound operation. The sound crew chief goes hand in hand with the next position, the sound designer. The sound designer, historically speaking, has almost always been the crew chief. The sound designer is the person who says, here's what mics we're using, here's where the mics go, here's where monitors go, here's all the decisions about who gets mic'd and things like that. In massive productions, they would be different people, but here, our crew is relatively small, 5 and 6 people, and it just makes sense to have the person making the decisions, the designer, be the same person as the person enforcing the decisions, the crew chief. It just works a lot easier from that standpoint. And these are all pre-show positions, except for crew chief, that is a permanent position. The other pre-show positions are just the technicians. They don't really specialize until we get closer to the show. Closer to the show is when we see a lot of positions emerge, and that's where they're filled by various people. The biggest one is the A1, or the sound engineer, the mix engineer. The A1 runs the show during the show. They are behind the board, they are pushing faders, they are doing the job. Historically speaking, this has also been the sound designer because they can best implement the design, but there have been examples such as a musical we did, Little Shop of Horrors, several years ago, where the designer was not the same person as the A1. They were two different people, but usually the A1 and designer are the same person, and the A1 will be running the board during the show. Next is the A2. The A2 is the assistant to the A1. This is a readily overlooked position. This position is probably the most important because they take over whenever the A1 has to leave. I know one of my faults is I'm very hands-on, so I'll run off the board to go fix an issue during rehearsals. So my A2 will take over and they will seamlessly be able to run whatever it is if I'm not there for some reason. I always say it follows the bus rule. If I'm driving here one day and I get hit by a bus and I can't make it to rehearsal, the A2 should seamlessly be able to take over and run the show. They should know the show just as well as the A1 because they could have to take over at any moment. The A2 also runs script on bigger shows. For smaller Trumbauer pieces, there will only be 2 people in the booth or 2 people on the crew, so you won't have a script necessarily. But on the larger shows, there will be someone sitting in the middle of the booth who acts almost as a stage manager for sound, whose job is to annotate the script and call cues for both the cues and the mix engineer, and to make notes. And they will also be the lead troubleshooter. There will be the person who's supposed to get off of the booth and go and fix problems as needed. Very powerful position. Next is technically the A3. They don't go by that. They're usually the cues engineer. They'll be on the sound laptop, which I have in front of me here. We'll get into that later. But they'll be running QLab and they'll be running cues during the show, playing pre-show and doing all that. For larger productions, for smaller Trumbauer pieces, the 2 positions are mix engineer and cues in the booth and in the whole crew. Other positions for the larger crew, for the larger shows, include mic table. And mic table can be as simple as 1 person, as there's 2-3 body mics, or it can be as complex as up to 4 and 5 people, even having a sub-crew chief of their own whose only job is to set up the script and call mic changes, because there are so many mic changes going on both sides of the stage. And later in this video we'll cover how to set up a mic table and decide all that. But that's really the positions of sound at any point during the big shows. Next we're going to probably move into equipment in the sound closet.
Thank you, Brandon.